This is America, and this is the Korean War Veterans Memorial here in Washington, D.C., which stands as testament to a more than 70-year-old self-defense pact between Seoul and Washington. In recent days, though, Donald Trump has asked the Pentagon to scale back major military exercises with South Korea as he once again turns his attention to the North and its leader, Kim Jong Un. As he struggles with the war in Iran, is the president now looking for a more manageable win elsewhere? In a few minutes, we'll be looking at what history can tell us about the near future. First, though, let's go to our Washington, D.C. studio and Alex Marquardt.
Thank you, Richard. Donald Trump appears to be rethinking how he handles the countries that he's had the toughest time with. The Iranian leadership, for its part, has not caved, even after months of American strikes. And now he's trying a different approach with North Korea. Trump has long talked up his relationship with their leader, Kim Jong Un, and appears to be considering giving up on the idea of North Korea ever fully disarming. This is all raising some bigger questions, whether he's moving away from force and trying to make deals instead. Richard Gaisford looks at how we got here.
When North Korea invaded its southern neighbor in 1950, the world responded, with the US sending the largest contingent of troops to defend the country.
At Busan, the UN forces had to stand firm or be pushed off the Korean peninsula.
3 years later, an armistice was agreed, but no formal peace treaty was ever signed. That means North and South Korea are officially still at war.
The presence of American soldiers helps guarantee the security of the entire free world as well.
At the same time, Washington agreed a mutual self-defense treaty with their counterparts in Seoul, promising a permanent presence to deter future attacks. 28,000 US troops remain in the country at Camp Humphreys, which is the largest US foreign base. In Donald Trump's first term, he tried to do what no US president had ever managed to do before: to bring North Korea on side and deliver a permanent peace. Trump first met Kim Jong Un in Singapore, and it was the first time a US president had ever sat down with a North Korean leader for talks. 8 months later, they headed to Vietnam to hammer out a deal in Hanoi. The talks broke down. That summer, Donald Trump said Kim Jong Un had written to him, expressing displeasure at joint South Korean and US military exercises, which the president had already scaled back. Days later, Trump traveled to Korea's Denuclearized zone and became the first sitting US president to step onto North Korean territory. It was an historic and hastily arranged meeting that failed to deliver a deal. Since then, there's been no meetings, no breakthroughs, and little discussion of special relationships, with an increase in North Korean propaganda and cyber attacks. But the president is now once again calling for substantial reductions in US and South Korean military exercises, because he wants to talk with Kim Jong Un.
Are you exchanging written letters with Kim Jong Un?
Can't tell you that. But I get along with him. And you know what? The fact that I get along with him, that's a good thing, not a bad thing. He has 57 very powerful nuclear weapons.
More than 70 years since American forces stopped fighting in Korea and the armistice was signed, it would seem unlikely that Donald Trump could suddenly pull off a peace deal that had previously eluded him. But talks would certainly shift the focus from his troubles in the Middle East that continue to suck in US resources. The George Washington recently left Vietnam and is now operating in the Arabian Sea. That means there'll be no US carrier strike group in the Indo-Pacific region, which dramatically reduces naval cover for South Korea and surrounding countries, potentially for more than a year. Richard Gaisford, Al Jazeera, Washington.
And here to discuss President Trump's new North Korea approach is Jenny Town. She is the director of the Stimson Korea program in 38 North, which provides analysis on North Korea, and Mark Fitzpatrick, who is a former acting deputy assistant secretary of state on non-proliferation. Mark and Jenny, thank you so much for being with us. This is a really interesting new chapter in the conversation between U.S. the U.S. and North Korea, it's relatively one-sided right now. But Mark, what do you think is prompting this new outreach from Trump? Is it the optics and the headlines that come out of a big meeting, or does the U.S. side actually think that they can accomplish something now?
Well, I think it comes down to really what does President Trump want to do. And frankly, I've been surprised, Alex, that he hasn't tried to do this before, because he likes Kim Jong Un. He likes
before in the second term. Yeah,
before in the second term. But why now? Well, I think it's because he's run out of other possible foreign policy wins. The Iran war is a disaster for him. And I think he's bored with it. He doesn't know what to do there. And he looks to North Korea and thinks, oh, here's my old buddy. Maybe we can make music together again.
But substantively, is there any indication from Pyongyang that would give Washington the sense that they could move the ball forward in some areas?
No, I don't think there's any indication at all. North Korea has been reluctant to engage with the United States. They've got friendships with Russia, stronger with China now than they've had for a while. So they don't need the United States anymore. This is a one-sided approach by Trump.
We saw this sudden scaling down, Jenny, of joint U.S.-South Korean military exercises. That's a slight towards Seoul. But what does it tell us about what the Trump administration may be willing to concede to the North Koreans?
Well, I think we're seeing a revert to the playbook from 2018. And of course, back then, when we were starting negotiations, you had Trump announce in the press conference after the Singapore summit that we were going to end all war games, is what he called it at that point in time, because they're so expensive. And at that time, in the relationship, it was seen as a big concession to the North Koreans. The North Koreans were very happy with it. And I think he thinks that this is another way to get their attention and that, kind of start over and show goodwill. But the way that it happened, of course, the fact that it was so haphazard, so last minute, too last minute for it to actually be canceled or actually, substantively scaled back in any kind of rational way, it comes across as insincere. And you saw in the Kim Jong Un statement afterwards where, the complaint was, nice try, but it doesn't actually indicate any kind of policy change. And that's really what they're looking at now and looking for as they're trying to assess whether there's a reason to come back to the table.
Do you think Trump would ever go so far as to remove American troops from South Korea, which, of course, the North Koreans would love to see?
I don't think we're in that territory, even if he has talked about it in the past. And I don't think the administration would push back on that quite heavily, especially outside of an actual negotiation framework. It's interesting, though, you have seen the South Korean president also now call for the relevant parties to get together to actually talk about ending the Korean War, building an actual peace agreement to replace the armistice. And so I think there's a lot of things that are negotiable right now. And, it wouldn't necessarily be the full removal of troops, but the number of troops may come up in conversation. The types of exercises may come up. All of these things are negotiable. But the way he did it, he could have talked to Lee Jae-myung, who would have been open to these ideas. But to openly undermine the South Koreans the way that he did was just a really bad move.
How do you think Pyongyang, Mark, is interpreting Washington's eagerness? Because President Trump said that he would like to meet with Kim Jong Un. He'd like to do it before the end of the year. So he kind of boxed himself in. So does that give Pyongyang more leverage? I
think it gives Pyongyang leverage both on the timing and on the substance. Trump is obviously the one eager to resume this friendship. Kim Jong Un is ready to sit back and see what else have you got. Okay, you did this one thing. It doesn't mean that much to us. Give us something that really means something. And so they're in a strong negotiating position here, especially since Trump said by the end of the year.
And is that message of what else you got reinforced, Jenny, by the ballistic missile test that we saw? I think it was just the day after it was announced that those exercises were being scaled down? It
all fits together, right? The Kim Jong Un statement, I think, is the most definitive we've seen lately in terms of, the North Koreans really looking for policy changes that lower the hostile, take away the hostile elements of U.S. policy towards North Korea. In the past, they've talked about wanting acceptance of their nuclear status. And I think, even the idea of the salvo of short-range ballistic missile launches that they did post exercises or post this announcement, those were obviously planned in advance. The North Koreans had indicated in advance the week before that, they saw these exercises as being of greater scale than what they've seen in the past, and so it needed a greater demonstration. And so obviously this gesture that Trump didn't change that calculus.
So this was, to remind our viewers, this was 10 ballistic missiles that were fired off the coast of North Korea, of course, into the sea. You've mentioned Kim Yo-jong twice now. That is Kim Jong Un's sister, and she put out a statement after the announcement about the military exercises. This is the highest level statement that we've seen from the North Korean government. I want to put up on the screen here. She says that the provocative, aggressive nature of the drills won't change, even though their duration and size were reduced. So, Mark, do you think Trump got anything while he hurt ties with one of America's closest allies in the region?
No, I don't think he got anything at all yet. He thinks he will get something. And maybe the positive words that Kim Yong-jo said about him, maybe he regards that as positive, an affirmation of a friendship. And for him, those personal relationships are very important. It means nothing in terms of U.S.-North Korea relations. So, yeah, I think he gave up something for nothing. And this insult, this disrespect to South Korea of doing something without, arranging it with them beforehand, I think is very damaging long term.
What does it do to U.S. credibility more broadly when allies and adversaries alike see what the U.S. just did to Seoul?
Well, I think at this point, it's just one more data point of how the U.S. policy, especially towards allies, and the U.S. credibility towards our allies is really eroding. It is one of these instances now where, the policy is at the whim of the president. It could change at any minute. And in terms of, assurances to our allies, that's not an reassuring sign. And you already see the creep on the European side of the equation that's moving towards greater strategic autonomy. In Asia, I think there was still hope that, the U.S. There's fewer options for them. They see themselves as more dependent on the U.S. and hoping that the policy would somehow revert back to what it was pre this second term of Trump. But I think this really signals that our allies really need to be thinking about their own strategic future and have much more limited expectations of what the U.S. is going to do.
And that's exactly what we're seeing in NATO and what the European allies are thinking of. So let's discuss what could be on the table. It's clear that Trump wants talks, but what could a potential deal between Washington and Pyongyang actually look like? Our Eva McCann looks at the options.
North Korea already has the bomb, and that changes what President Donald Trump can get from Kim Jong Un. Now, historically, the U.S. has demanded that North Korea give up its entire nuclear arsenal, but outside estimates have the East Asian country at about 50 assembled warheads, with enough material to make as many as 40 more.
It looks like there are three possible deals. Option 1, denuclearization. Kim gives up the weapons. That's the biggest prize, but probably the hardest sell. Option 2, a nuclear freeze. Kim keeps what he has, but stops producing more bomb-making material. Option 3, arms control. Washington accepts the weapons exist, but negotiates limits on warheads, missiles, testing, and production. The last approach may be gaining ground. The president of South Korea says Trump is open to considering a phased strategy. Freeze first, denuclearization later. And now, Trump is reducing U.S.-South Korea military exercises while looking to revive diplomacy with Kim. Eva McCann, Al Jazeera, Washington.
So we saw this dismissal of this overture by Washington in terms of the exercises from Kim Yo-jong, but it wasn't all negative. She also said that her brother, Kim Jong Un, and Trump still have excellent relations. Mark, to you, does that signal an opening, a willingness to talk?
Oh, I think there's a signal there, certainly. I mean, the positivity of it. We've seen so much negative verbiage come from North Korea over the years. To see them be respectful to the U.S. president, I'm sure that was meant to tell Trump, yes, there's a possibility here, but give us more.
It is striking to me as we discuss this that it's all about signals, and it's so little about the actual concrete elements that Eva was just laying out there, which tells me we're obviously pretty far away from any kind of any deal here?
I would look at it more as like the door to diplomacy is unlocked. Doesn't necessarily mean it's open. And again, the North Koreans have laid out their preconditions of what they want to see. And if you look at the way they talk about U.S. policy, it's very negative. And the way that they portray the U.S. role in the region is very negative. So, they have refrained from saying, specific things about Trump himself and denigrating things about Trump himself, which does leave the door unlocked. But the threshold is very high as to how do we actually create a scenario where the North Koreans find resuming talks with the U.S. even compelling.
Unlocked, but Kim Jong Un is not rushing through that door in the same way that Donald Trump is. Is it because he still feels relatively burned from the last time they met in Hanoi in 2019?
Well, I don't think the North Koreans really believe they're going to get much from any kind of negotiation with the United States. I don't think they're willing to actually make concessions the way they were before. Especially when they do have relations with, Russia and China that don't require them to make those sacrifices. So, they have options now, and they're in a much stronger position than they were before. So there's very little incentive for them to concede to those preconditions just to get in a room with Trump.
Expand on that, Mark, if you will. How much more leverage does North Korea have now, 7 years later?
Well, they know something about what Trump was willing to give up then. So they've already pocketed that he was willing to remove UN sanctions, but not U.S. sanctions. And they probably think that he would be willing to make a deal with U.S. sanctions as well. They know that Trump has had in his mind the idea that South Korea, U.S. relations are one-sided, that South Korea gets everything, doesn't pay for it. And they might think that he would be willing to reduce troops or maybe possibly even remove the U.S. Security alliance. So I think they do have more leverage now.
North Korea, of course, is such a different case than Iran. When it comes to Iran, what we heard from the Trump administration is we need to stop their nuclear program, make sure they never build a nuke. That horse has bolted when it comes to North Korea. And I want to show our viewers what we're talking about in terms of nuclear arsenal, because in North Korea, and this is according to the United States, the North Koreans have some 57 nuclear weapons. The South Koreans say that that's actually significantly higher. China has some 620. The U.S. has 3,700. Russia, for its part, has 4,400. Jenny, it's also striking how far apart Washington and Pyongyang seem to be just on this fundamental question of whether North Korea should have nuclear weapons. You noted a moment ago that Kim Jong Un wants to be leading a respected nuclear nation. But what we've heard from Trump very recently speaks more to the U.S. desire that they don't have any nuclear weapons at all, which seems like a very far-fetched possibility.
There's a huge gap in expectation of what new negotiations would look like. And I think there is a bit of, Trump sees unfinished business from the first term. He had clearer goals in the first term, but North Korea has moved on. They don't need the U.S. the way they don't have the urgency to make concessions with the U.S. in order to get that relationship again. But in the meantime, the idea that they've said, like, hey, we do want respect for our nuclear status from the U.S., acceptance of the nuclear status, they're not willing to talk about denuclearization. And so for Trump to continue to talk about, they shouldn't have done it, they wouldn't have done it if I had been president. It's like, well, he was president. And they were continuing to grow their program. But it still portrays it in a negative light. So if you're the North Koreans, there's no reason to meet yet. Because that is still at the heart of the conversation.
Do you agree, Mark, that it's just a non-starter when it comes to eliminating the arsenal?
Eliminating the arsenal is absolutely a non-starter. Reducing maybe is a non-starter as well. Capping, I think, is within the realm of possibility. Getting an official moratorium on nuclear testing, a moratorium on ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missile testing. I think those are both within the realm of the possibility. But North Korea has made it absolutely clear. They are a nuclear-armed state. It's in their constitution. They're not going to go back on that. They think it's vital to the preservation of the regime and the nation.
So it's...
If I could just add to that, though, those things were kind of low-hanging fruit back in 2018 when Trump started negotiations.
The slowing of the program,
the slowing of the program, the freezing of, and the moratorium on testing. These were low-hanging fruit back then. The problem is, in the meantime, North Korea have now enshrined these things into their constitution, as well as the right to continue doing them. So if North Korea is still willing to even consider talking about and negotiating on those points, the price of everything is so much higher now.
Do you think that the Trump administration has accepted that that they'll still talk about denuclearizing, but they know that they're going to have to settle for somewhere in the middle, capping, freezing, et cetera?
I think there's a recognition of that, and even if you look at 2018, it wasn't it wasn't actually the Libya approach. They were willing to phase that out. It is a process because North Korea's arsenals are so extensive and their infrastructure is so extensive. The bigger question is, again, on the North Korean side, what is their incentive to make those kinds of concessions anymore? And
Mark, you've said that the arms control community has essentially accepted that. Do you think the administration has?
So just let me clarify, when I say the arms control community, the kind of people that Jenny and I talk to a lot have moved toward the idea that denuclearization, is a future goal. Recently, Victor Cha, one of the doyens of the North Korea expertise in the capital, has said that, but not the bureaucracy itself. Those in the Pentagon, they still are pretty firm on. We have to demand denuclearization, and in the State Department. And one reason is because Japan demands it. Now, South Korea, having changed its policy, does provide some basis to think that, well, maybe this is the direction we're moving in.
What do you think, Jenny, the Iran war has taught the North Koreans? How have they adjusted their position as a result of what we've seen in the past 6 months?
I think they feel justified in the decisions that they've made and the sacrifices they've made to get to where they are. Because I think they see themselves as a very different situation than Iran. Iran does not have nuclear weapons yet, even if they have latency and even if they're on the road in that direction, and that has left them vulnerable. What North Korea has not only do they feel like they have the deterrent capability to keep them safe, but they also have now seen the prestige that comes with it. They don't see themselves as a poor, vulnerable country. They see themselves as working with the big powers to reshape the international order. And this is the way that Kim Jong Un talks about himself and talks about his role, North Korea's role in the world these days.
Why does Pyongyang feel like they have more room to maneuver, more comfort because of these ties, as you both mentioned, closer ties to China and Russia? Is it that the U.S. sanctions and punishment just aren't biting as much? That's
absolutely a big factor. Their economy has been growing, according to South Korea. North Korea doesn't provide statistics itself. And the aid that they've been getting from Russia in exchange for the missiles, the drones, the troops, we don't know exactly the scope of it, but it's a lot of economic and technical assistance from Russia. And then another thing is that North Korea has demonstrated that it is able to impose the strictest sanctions on itself, which it did during the COVID years, of stopping all border exchange. They really, they had no interactions with the outside world for 2 years, and they survived. So having survived that, they know they can survive just about any sanctions. How much of this outreach from Washington is about trying to peel Kim Jong Un away from Moscow, away from Putin?
It's hard to say. Certainly, I think that is, in terms of the bureaucracy, I think that is one of the goals.
When you say bureaucracy, you mean outside of the White House, the experts in the different departments.
Right. And so, I think if you're looking at the defense establishment in the State Department, I think that's absolutely one of the goals that they would like to see, and they're trying to figure out ways to do. But when it comes to Trump himself, I'm not sure that that's necessarily where he's thinking. And I do think he really values the relationship with Kim Jong Un. And I think he really does think he can do something others couldn't do before him, right? So it's more the challenge of it, it's more the spectacle of it, where he thinks he can be the one to crack the code.
And of course, Russia has gotten quite a bit out of its support from the North Koreans. That establishment, Mark, Pentagon, State Department, intelligence agencies, How do you think they're reacting to what Seoul has been put through in the past few months?
Oh, I think they're feeling great sympathy with Seoul. I mean, you know, over the years, how many times have we heard U.S. officials, military officials, State Department, they go to Seoul and they talk about the steadfastness of the relationship, the undying commitment of the U.S. Alliance. And to have Trump treat it so cavalierly, I think they're really in a quandary about that. And they were happy, I think, that Seoul did go along with cutting back the exercise. And they're probably, you know, looking to think that maybe something can come out of it. To go back to what Jenny said at the beginning, this unlocks the door, and maybe, just maybe, it can provide a path to some diplomacy that could be mutually beneficial. I don't think they're too optimistic about what the end result would be, but now maybe finally they can see diplomacy in play.
We only have about 15 seconds left, Jenny, but what have we seen in terms of reaction from Seoul? Because they can't afford to sever ties, of course.
Sure. I think it's been very divisive. So there's parts that are feel very embarrassed and angst-ridden because of the decision. And there are others who see it as an opportunity now because they have been trying to encourage the U.S. and North Korea to restart diplomacy, to lower tensions on the Korean Peninsula.
Well, it'll be fascinating to see what happens in the coming months with President Trump trying to get this meeting, which at the very least would be incredible to watch. Mark Fitzpatrick, Jenny Town, thank you both very much for your insights. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Alex.
And that's all from myself and the team here in Washington. I want to hand it back to Richard Gaisford and Al Jazeera's global headquarters in Doha.
Well, that's it for this edition of This is America. We'll be back on Monday at 18:30 GMT. That's 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time here in the United States. You can, of course, watch any of our programs at any time on YouTube. For now, though, from the Korean War Veterans Memorial in Washington, it's goodbye.